At my commissioning ceremony in Charleston, the air was heavy with the heat of a South Carolina summer, and the bright flags along the field seemed to shimmer under the sun. Families crowded the rows of chairs, cameras raised proud faces turned toward the cadets in crisp uniforms. I had dreamed of this moment for years. My name was about to be called. I stood straight in the polished white of my new army dress uniform and tried to quiet the pounding in my chest. The Citadel's campus glowed with ceremony. The band played, voices murmured, and then fell silent. I stepped forward toward the podium. The ground beneath my shoes felt both solid and unreal. I caught sight of my stepmother Carla in the audience. Her chin was tilted high, her eyes narrow with the same cold judgment I had grown up under. She wore a dark suit and clutched her handbag tightly. I wanted to believe nothing could ruin this day, that finally I had broken free from her control. But the knot in my stomach tightened as if some part of me knew the storm was coming. My voice quivered when the announcer said my name, Lauren Bennett, 2nd Lieutenant, United States Army. Applause rose, echoing across the courtyard. I saluted. I smiled. I felt my throat catch with pride. And then it happened. The scrape of a chair on the ground, the sudden shout that sliced through the summer air. Carla stood, her hand plunging into her bag. For a fraction of a second, my mind refused to register what my eyes saw. Then metal glinted. Gasps shot through the crowd. Someone yelled to get down. My body stiffened. My training screamed at me to move, yet I froze. A deafening crack erupted. Pain tore across my chest, and the world spun sideways. My knees buckled, the sky lurched, and I tasted copper. Voices turned to chaos. Families screamed. Officers rushed forward. Chairs clattered. I was on the ground, but I forced myself up. My lungs burned. My vision blurred. Blood stained the white of my uniform, spreading in a cruel red blossom. Yet my hand rose with a discipline I had promised myself never to abandon. I raised my arm and gave a salute. The motion was trembling, but steady enough to cut through the bedlam. Across from me, only feet away, General Robert Whitaker rose from his seat. 4 stars shone on his shoulders. His eyes locked on me and then snapped to Carla. His face shifted from shock to fury, a fury that carried the weight of decades of command. Guests held their breath. His voice roared above the panic. "This ends now!" Soldiers rushed and shouts rang, and the scene blurred at the edges. My ears buzzed, but I felt the moment hang as if all of Charleston had frozen. My salute wavered in the thick air, the taste of iron still sharp, but my heart refused to bow. In that suspended second, I was no longer only a daughter bound to a toxic home. I was an officer, bloodied but unbroken, standing beside a man whose wrath promised justice. That was the moment every eye in the courtyard widened. That was the moment the entire city held its breath. I grew up in Goose Creek, a small town just outside Charleston, where pine trees leaned over cracked sidewalks, and the air always seemed heavy with humidity. People said Goose Creek was a quiet place, a family place, but for me, it was a place where silence was dangerous. My father, Michael Bennett, died when I was only 7. I remember his laugh echoing in our backyard, the way he used to let me climb on his shoulders to hang flags on the porch every 4th of July. When the heart attack took him, it felt like the light went out of our little house. My mother, Margaret, was gentle, fragile even, and she carried grief like it was stitched into her skin. At first, I thought we would get through it together, mother and daughter holding on to each other against the storm. But 2 years later, Carla Walker entered our lives, and everything changed. Carla arrived like a savior at first. She met my mother at a church picnic a hot July afternoon when the tables sagged under the weight of potato salad and fried chicken. Carla was charming then, with her red lipstick and her easy laugh, her hands fluttering as she told stories about her work at a local boutique. She made my mother feel seen again. And for a while, I wanted to believe she would fill the emptiness my father left behind. She bought me a pair of sneakers, once bright white with blue stripes, and I thought maybe she could be the kind of stepmother you see in children's books. But that sweetness was short-lived. By the time I turned 10, the mask had begun to slip. Carla wasn't interested in being part of our family, she wanted to control it. She started small, suggesting what I should wear to school, criticizing my handwriting, reminding my mother of every dollar spent on groceries. My mother, too eager not to lose her again, nodded along, shrinking in Carla's shadow. The first real crack came one Saturday morning. I had been saving my allowance to buy a basketball. I loved playing with the neighborhood kids at the cracked court near the fire station. When I brought the ball home, Carla took one look at it, sneered, and said, "Girls don't need to waste their time running around like boys." She punctured the ball with a kitchen knife right in front of me. The sound of the air hissing out was the sound of something inside me collapsing. I looked to my mother, hoping she would speak up, but she only pressed her lips together and whispered, "Maybe it's for the best, Lauren." That night, lying awake in my small room with posters of the Citadel cadets I had cut from a magazine taped to the wall, I realized something important. Carla wasn't here to build a family. She was here to rule one. And from then on, every day felt like training for survival. By middle school, Carla's control had gone from sharp remarks to constant policing. She monitored every phone call I made, stood in the hallway during sleepovers, and even told the guidance counselor that I was too sensitive whenever I asked for help. I learned to hide pieces of myself, scribbling stories in notebooks I kept under loose floorboards, sneaking to the Goose Creek Library just to breathe in quiet. But hiding never lasted long. Carla had a way of sniffing out anything that gave me joy. One afternoon, I came home from basketball practice with my hair damp from sweat and a smile on my face because our team had won. Carla was waiting at the kitchen table. She held my gym bag in one hand and my jersey in the other. "You think bouncing a ball makes you worth something?" she asked. Before I could answer, she ripped the jersey in two, the fabric tearing with a sound that still makes my stomach clench. My mother sat frozen by the sink, her knuckles white as she gripped a dish towel. I shouted, begged her to do something, anything, but she only whispered, "Don't make it worse, Lauren." Carla smirked like my mother's silence was her favorite ally. That was when I started to realize the house wasn't divided into rooms, it was divided into territories. Carla controlled the living room, the kitchen, even the conversations at the dinner table. My mother had retreated to her bedroom where she folded laundry late into the night, just to avoid confrontation. And me, I had my imagination the Citadel posters on my wall, and the dream of wearing a uniform no one could tear apart. Still, Carla's control wasn't just about possessions. It was about fear. I was 13 the first time she shoved me hard enough that my head hit the wall. The plaster cracked a jagged line, splitting the pale yellow paint. She hissed in my face that I had better learn my place. I told my gym teacher I had tripped. Nobody questioned it. It became easier to swallow the pain than to explain it. Sundays were the worst. Carla paraded us to church smiling wide for the congregation. Her arm looped through my mother's as if she were the savior of our broken family. People would pat her on the back, thanking her for raising Michael's girl so well. I would stand there, my scalp still sore from where she had yanked my hair that morning, biting the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood, just to keep from screaming. Nights were long in Goose Creek. I would lie in bed listening to the cicadas outside and Carla's voice through the thin walls. Sometimes she shouted, sometimes she laughed too loudly, the sound echoing like a reminder that she ruled every inch of the house. But in those hours, I would picture myself running across the parade ground at the Citadel, my boots pounding pavement, my back straight, my eyes forward. I clung to that vision because it was the only thing she couldn't take from me yet. High school in Goose Creek should have been about football games under the Friday night lights and late-night milkshakes at the Waffle House on Highway 52, but for me, it was survival training. Carla found new ways to make me small. If my grades were perfect, she sneered that I thought I was smarter than everyone. If I slipped even once, she slapped my report card on the counter and said, "So much for being the daughter of a soldier." She said it like my father's memory was a weight I could never carry. Friends grew distant because she intercepted phone calls, accused me of sneaking around, and once showed up unannounced at a school dance just to drag me home in front of everyone. I learned to stop inviting people into my life because it always ended with humiliation. My mother shrank further into herself during those years. She moved through the house like a shadow, her eyes darting, her words clipped. She never raised her voice at Carla, never defended me, not even when Carla tore down the Citadel posters from my bedroom wall. I taped them back up with shaky hands, the corners curled from being ripped down and restored too many times. That wall became my rebellion. It wasn't just a decoration, it was a vow. At 16, Carla shoved me into the hallway so hard I nearly tumbled down the stairs. I had confronted her about throwing away my application for the JROTC program at school. She claimed it was nonsense and said no daughter of hers would waste time pretending to be a soldier. My head throbbed from where it struck the banister, but I swallowed my anger because arguing meant worse. That night, I stayed up past midnight staring at the crack in the wall and whispering to myself, "One day I'll wear that uniform and she won't be able to touch me." I clung to that thought the way some kids clung to fairy tales. Meanwhile, Goose Creek's streets became my training ground. I jogged before sunrise when Carla was still asleep, the air sticky with salt from the marshes. I ran across the old Naval Weapons Station trails, counting my breaths, pretending I was already a cadet at the Citadel. Each run was an escape, each mile proof that I could keep moving forward. Teachers started to notice my determination, especially Sergeant Wilson, a retired Marine who taught history. He caught me staring too long at the wall map of the world one day and asked why I always looked like I had someplace to be. I told him the truth I wanted out. He didn't press for details. He just nodded and said, "Then you better get tough. The world doesn't hand out freedom, you earn it." His words lodged deep. They were the opposite of Carla's venom. They were a seed of belief that my dream wasn't ridiculous. By my junior year, I had secretly met with a Citadel recruiter in Charleston. I remember the way the flag rippled outside his office, the smell of old wood and floor polish. For the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't crazy for wanting more. I filled out the paperwork with shaking hands, praying Carla would never find it. Because in my mind, that application wasn't just for college. It was my escape hatch. It was the rope ladder out of the burning house. Senior year of high school should have been filled with excitement about college visits and prom dresses, but for me, it was a countdown clock. I had been accepted to the Citadel. The envelope came in the mail one gray afternoon, the school crest stamped in bold blue across the top. My hands shook as I tore it open in the front yard, heart hammering so loud I thought the neighbors might hear. Congratulations, it began, and for a moment the world felt wide open. I wanted to run inside and show my mother, but Carla intercepted me at the door. She snatched the letter from my hand, scanned it quickly, then sneered. "So, you think you're leaving me? You think the army is going to save you?" She crumpled the page and tossed it into the trash. My throat tightened, but instead of breaking, I dug it back out later, smoothing the wrinkles until the words were legible again. That paper wasn't just an acceptance letter, it was my lifeline. In the weeks that followed, Carla grew more vicious. She forgot to give me messages from recruiters, hid my scholarship documents, even tried to convince my mother that the military would ruin me. At one point, she ripped open my duffel bag and dumped my carefully folded clothes onto the kitchen floor, shouting that I was ungrateful that I owed her for raising me. My mother stood nearby, wringing her hands, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please, Carla, let her go." But Carla turned on her, snarling, "Without me, you'd have nothing. You think you can live without me?" That night, I sat in my room, staring at the acceptance letter smoothed flat beneath the glass of a picture frame I had stolen from the hallway. I whispered to myself, "You can't stop me." It was the first time I truly believed it. Graduation day arrived in late May, the Carolina sun blazing down on the football field where rows of chairs lined up like soldiers in formation. My classmates laughed and hugged, tossing their caps in the air after the ceremony. I smiled for the photos, but inside I was bracing for the storm I knew Carla would bring. Sure enough, at the family dinner afterward at a small restaurant in North Charleston, she found her moment. She leaned across the table, her voice low and venomous. "You'll be back here within a month. Mark my words, the Citadel will break you." I stared back at her steady for once. "No, Carla," I said softly. "You already tried, and I'm still standing." For the first time, her face flickered with something I had never seen before: uncertainty. When the day finally came to report to the Citadel, my mother hugged me so tightly I thought she might never let go. Her whispered words were shaky, desperate. "Please, don't forget me." Carla stood stiffly in the background, arms crossed, eyes cold. But as the bus pulled away from Goose Creek, I pressed my forehead to the glass and made a silent promise I wasn't coming back to be her prisoner. I was going to earn my freedom in uniform. The first morning I woke up at the Citadel in Charleston, I thought I had made a mistake. The sun wasn't even up yet when the bugle call blared across the parade ground, a sound so sharp it felt like it was splitting my skull. I had barely slept. My room was bare white walls and metal bunks that smelled faintly of disinfectant and nervous sweat. The uniform hanging on the chair looked too crisp, too foreign, as if it belonged to someone braver. But when the shouting started in the hallway, I swung my legs over the bed and moved. Hesitation wasn't an option here. The upperclassmen stormed into the barracks like hurricanes, their voices booming with commands. "Move faster! Bed's tight! You think you're home with Mommy!" The words cut, but they also pushed me. By the time the sun rose over Charleston Harbor, my bed was tight enough to bounce a coin, my uniform stiff against my skin, and my lungs already burning from the first run across the Ravenel Bridge. Sweat trickled down my back as the salt air stung my throat, but each step was a defiance. For every insult Carla had hurled, for every night I had gone to bed wishing for escape, I pushed harder. The Citadel didn't care who my stepmother was. Here, weakness showed itself and you either fought through it or got left behind. The training was relentless. Push-ups until my arms shook like leaves in a storm. Drills under the unforgiving Carolina sun, sweat pooling into my boots. Marches across the battery in full gear while tourists watched some snapping photos, their faces a blur as we stomped in unison. There was no room for hesitation, no space for self-pity. At first, I failed. I fell behind in runs, stumbled over obstacles, and nearly dropped my rifle during parade drill. Each mistake was met with a roar of disapproval, and each roar brought back the sting of Carla's voice, her smirk when I faltered. But unlike at home, failure here wasn't the end. If I dropped, someone barked at me to get back up. If I lagged, the whole platoon had to do it again, and their glares burned worse than any punishment. Slowly, I learned. My body hardened, my lungs stretched to hold more air, my arms grew stronger. The first time I completed the 2-mile run without slowing, sweat pouring down my face, I felt something fierce stir inside me. It wasn't just survival anymore. It was proof. Proof that Carla hadn't broken me. Proof that I could carry weight both on my shoulders and in my heart. Evenings in the barracks were the hardest. My body ached in places I didn't know had muscles. I missed the cicadas of Goose Creek, even the marsh smell that clung to summer nights. But then I would look around at the other cadets, heads bowed over books or polishing shoes, until they gleamed like mirrors. We were all suffering, but we were suffering together. That bond, silent but steady, wrapped around me like armor. One night, I found myself in the gym, my hands raw from the climbing rope, my arms trembling. Sergeant Harris, a grizzled instructor with a scar down his cheek, stopped in front of me. His voice was low, but it carried weight. "Bennett, you've got fire. Don't waste it fighting ghosts. Use it here." His words struck deeper than he knew. Because every time I strained under the weight of my pack, I wasn't just fighting for my place at the Citadel. I was fighting against the echo of Carla's voice, the control she thought would define me forever. That first semester was a blur of exhaustion and awakening. By the time fall leaves drifted across the parade ground, I was no longer the girl sneaking runs before sunrise in Goose Creek. I was a cadet. My chin was higher, my steps sharper, and for the first time in years when I looked in the mirror, I didn't see Carla's prisoner. I saw a soldier in the making. Winter at the Citadel was cruel in its own way. The Charleston humidity didn't disappear with the cold. It clung to everything, making early morning runs feel like breathing through a wet rag. My gloves were stiff, my breath fogging the air as we pounded down the narrow streets near Marion Square. By then, my body had toughened, but fatigue still lurked like a shadow. Every bruise, every blister, every shouted command carried the same unspoken test. "Do you belong here?" There were days I doubted it. I remember failing a weapons inspection because a single speck of dust clung to the bolt of my rifle. The upperclassman's voice sliced through me, accusing me of laziness, of disrespect. For a moment, shame burned hotter than the Carolina sun. That night, polishing until my fingers cramped Carla's sneer filled my mind, her words about me never being good enough. I clenched my jaw and whispered to the empty barracks, "Not this time." The next inspection, my rifle gleamed like it had been forged from glass. Academics weren't easier. Between military drills and formations, I had to keep up with coursework in political science and leadership studies. The library became my sanctuary quiet, except for the hum of fluorescent lights. I forced myself to stay awake, scribbling notes until my eyes blurred. Each paper handed and each test passed felt like one more stone laid in the wall between me and Carla's control. The turning point came during a field exercise in the backwoods of South Carolina. It was February, the ground damp from rain, our packs heavy with gear. We navigated through thick trees, mud sucking at our boots. I slipped more than once, my shoulders screaming from the weight, but I refused to quit. At one checkpoint, the cadet leading us froze, lost in the maze of branches and shadows. Everyone looked at me. My stomach twisted with the old fear of speaking up, but something surged higher than fear. I pulled the map from his trembling hands, studied it quickly, and pointed east. "This way." My voice was steady, sharper than I expected. They followed, and within half an hour we stumbled into camp, the instructors waiting. For the first time, I saw respect in my classmates' eyes. Respect, not pity. By spring, the cadet staring back at me in the mirror wore pride like a second skin. My posture was straighter, my voice louder, my eyes sharper. I still carried scars from Goose Creek, invisible ones that flared whenever someone raised their voice too harshly, but here those scars became fuel. I was no longer surviving, I was proving myself. Every ceremony, every march across the parade ground brought me closer to the moment I had dreamed of for years commissioning. The thought of standing in that crisp white uniform, of raising my right hand and swearing an oath before the flag filled me with a mix of dread and fire. I knew Carla would be there. She wouldn't miss the chance to twist the day into her narrative. But for once, I felt ready. On the night before graduation, I stood alone on the seawall along the Charleston Battery. The water slapped gently against the rocks, the lamps casting a golden glow over the cobblestone streets. I thought about my father, about the promise I made as a girl, staring at Citadel posters taped to a cracked wall. I thought about every bruise, every tear, every word Carla had hurled at me. And then I thought about the cadet who had led her platoon through the woods, the one who had stood taller with every insult, every failure turned lesson. That cadet was me. As dawn approached, I tightened the straps of my polished uniform and whispered, "Tomorrow she won't take this from me." The air smelled of salt and jasmine, and for the first time, the weight on my chest wasn't fear. It was steel. The morning of my commissioning ceremony arrived hot and heavy, the kind of Charleston day where the air feels like it has been boiled before it touches your skin. The Citadel campus gleamed under the early sun, white buildings standing sharp against a cloudless sky, flags snapping along the Avenue of Remembrance. Families filled the bleachers near Summerall Chapel, their voices a low hum of pride, nervous laughter, and the rustle of programs. My uniform felt tighter than usual, starched edges pressing into my skin, each button fastened with hands that trembled not from weakness but from anticipation. I had waited for this moment for years, through every insult, every bruise, every night of hiding under thin sheets, praying for silence. Today was supposed to be proof that I had won. Yet as I lined up with my classmates, their faces flushed with excitement, my eyes scanned the crowd and froze. Carla was there. She sat 3 rows back, a pearl necklace gleaming against the deep red of her dress, her posture immaculate, her expression carved into the same cold smirk that had haunted me for half my life. My mother sat beside her, shoulders hunched, hands clasped so tight her knuckles looked bloodless. Even at a distance, I could see the fear in her eyes. Carla leaned close and whispered something that made my mother flinch, then straightened her spine, gaze fixed directly on me. For a second, my stomach dropped as if I had been pushed off the Ravenel Bridge. I forced my eyes forward, refusing to give her the satisfaction of seeing my fear. But the truth was, fear had already crawled up my spine and coiled itself around my throat. The commandant's voice echoed across the grounds, welcoming families, praising the cadets, reminding everyone of the weight of the oath we were about to take. Applause rolled like thunder, but I heard it through a haze. My pulse hammered as I marched in step with the others, each footfall sharp against the concrete. The cadence drilled into me through endless mornings of sweat and shouted commands. When we reached the platform, the heat pressed down harder, sweat pricking at the edge of my hairline. General Robert Whitaker stood at the podium, his 4 stars gleaming in the sun, his presence commanding silence even before he spoke. His words were steady, deliberate about service and sacrifice, about the meaning of standing taller than fear. My chest swelled with a strange mix of pride and dread. I wanted to hold on to his words, but my gaze kept flickering toward the crowd, toward Carla's figure that seemed carved out of stone. Each time I caught her eyes, I remembered broken jerseys, punctured basketballs, slammed doors. She looked at me now not with pride, not even with contempt, but with the certainty of someone who believed she still owned me. The oath began. Right hands lifted, voices rose in unison mine, weaving among them though my throat felt tight. I swore to defend, to serve, to honor the uniform that clung to me like a shield. And yet, even as the words left my mouth, the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. Something was wrong. Carla's hand moved beneath her purse, slow, deliberate. For a moment, I thought I was imagining it, paranoia born from years of fear. But then I saw the glint of metal. My breath caught. My mouth went dry. She was reaching for something I had prayed I would never see in her hands. I felt the world narrow, the edges of the crowd blurring, until all I saw was her hand tightening around the black grip. My heart stuttered in my chest. I wanted to scream, to warn everyone, but the oath was still echoing, and my classmates were focused forward, oblivious. Then her eyes locked on mine, and in them I saw not hesitation, not doubt, but a fury that had waited years for this moment. My body tensed, every nerve alive, the training of the Citadel crashing into the terror of Goose Creek. I braced myself, knowing that the ceremony, my proudest day, was seconds away from becoming something darker. The Charleston sun bore down, flags snapped in the wind, the crowd held its collective breath, and I whispered to myself, "Not today, Carla. Not anymore." The sun was blinding as it bounced off the white walls of the Citadel, but nothing could eclipse the gleam of steel in Carla's hand. For a heartbeat, the world slowed, the crowd unaware, their applause still fading from the oath we had just taken. My breath caught. The sound of my pulse filled my ears. I wanted to scream, to point, but before my voice could rise, Carla stood. Her chair scraped back with a screech that sliced through the air. Heads turned, murmurs rippled. And then came the sound I had prayed never to hear again, the crack of a gunshot. It was louder than any rifle fired on the range, louder than the cannons we heard on parade days, because it was aimed at me. The impact slammed into my side just below the shoulder, a searing white-hot pain that stole the air from my lungs. My knees buckled. For a moment, I thought I would collapse, but training, stubbornness, and defiance surged through me. I clenched my jaw, forced my legs straight, and snapped into a salute. My right arm trembled as I raised it, blood already seeping through the immaculate white of my uniform. Gasps tore through the crowd. Someone screamed. The bleachers erupted into chaos as families ducked, officers shouted commands, children cried. The commissioning ceremony dissolved into pandemonium, but in that chaos, my body rigid in salute, I caught the eyes of General Robert Whitaker. He had risen instantly, his towering figure rigid, the 4 stars on his shoulders blazing in the sun. His face was carved with fury, the kind of fury that didn't shout but commanded, silent and deadly. His chair toppled behind him as he moved, his voice booming, "Stand down!" But Carla didn't stand down. She shoved past the woman beside her, gun raised again, eyes wild. The pearl necklace at her throat glistened as she screamed something I couldn't make out her words, lost in the roar of panic. Officers surged forward, cadets moved instinctively to shield the stage, and I felt the heat of blood spreading across my chest. The world swayed, but still I held my salute. I couldn't drop it. Not in front of her, not in front of this city, not in front of my father's memory. The salute was my defiance, my answer to every insult, every bruise, every night of fear. And as the blood darkened the white fabric, as the sun glared down on the chaos, I thought, Let her see me stand. The next moments blurred. Carla shoved through hands reaching for her, her face twisted with rage. My mother's scream cut across the noise, raw and desperate. And then General Whitaker was there, his frame blocking the sun, his arm steady as he barked orders I couldn't hear over the ringing in my ears. He wasn't just a man anymore. He was the embodiment of command fury radiating from him like fire. Soldiers moved in response to his voice. Quicker than I could process, two Marine officers wrestled Carla to the ground, the gun skittering across the pavement with a metallic clang. The sound of it sliding against the stone was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. But the pain in my chest surged sharp and deep, threatening to drown me. My arm quivered as my salute finally wavered. Still before my vision blurred, I felt a hand grip my shoulder, the uninjured one, and heard a voice steady and low. "Lieutenant Bennett, you will not fall today." General Whitaker's face filled my view, fierce and unwavering. His eyes locked on mine, not pitying, not soft, but demanding. Demanding that I hold on. I managed a shaky whisper. "Sir, I'm still standing." His jaw tightened, and for the first time I saw something like pride flicker through his fury. The heat of the Charleston sun pressed against my skin as the world spiraled into a storm of noise. Shouts, screams, the scrape of chairs against concrete, it all blurred together into a rising tide. My chest burned blood soaking the white of my uniform, the metallic scent filling my nose. My knees quivered, but General Whitaker's hand on my shoulder anchored me. I swayed, vision tunneling, yet the words that cut through the chaos were his medic now boots thundered across the parade ground. Cadets sprinted, their faces pale, their eyes wide with horror at what had just unfolded in the sacred heart of the Citadel. Two medics dropped to their knees beside me, their kits snapping open with practiced precision. One pressed gauze hard against my wound, and I gasped, the world tilting. "Stay with me, Lieutenant," he barked. The title jolted me. Lieutenant! It was the rank I had just earned, the rank Carla had tried to strip from me in front of everyone. The word wrapped around me like armor. The crowd had dissolved into chaos. Parents clutched their children, some sobbing, others frozen in disbelief. The sound of sirens grew louder, Charleston police weaving through the gates, their lights strobing red and blue against the white walls. I could feel the press of cameras already, phones lifted above heads, lenses zooming in. And then I heard it, the sharp, distinct click of shutters. My salute, frozen in blood, had been captured. Somewhere in that sea of chaos, reporters were already sending the images out into the world. My body screamed to collapse, but my mind clung to one thought: if that picture reached beyond these gates, then everyone would know. Carla's control, her narrative, would shatter against the sight of me, refusing to fall. My mother's cries pierced through the noise. She was being held back by officers as she tried to push through, her voice breaking with my name. "Lauren, Lauren," I wanted to look at her to reassure her, but the medics forced my head-down oxygen mask sealing over my face. My breaths came shallow, rattling. One medic muttered through and through, "Lucky, lucky." The word echoed strangely. It didn't feel like luck, it felt like defiance. Carla screamed too, her voice shrill, venomous, as she was dragged away in handcuffs. She kicked, cursed, spat, her eyes wild with rage as she shouted that I had ruined her, that I was ungrateful. But the crowd didn't believe her. I could feel the shift. For years in Goose Creek, neighbors had nodded along with her charm. But here in this sacred space, under the stars of a general and the cameras of the press, her mask was torn away. A woman who would shoot her stepdaughter in uniform at her commissioning ceremony. That truth needed no explanation. General Whitaker loomed over me as the stretcher was pulled close. His voice was steady, unshakable. "You will live, Lieutenant. You will finish this journey." "Do you understand?" I forced my eyes open, meeting his. The world swam, but I nodded. "Yes, sir." My voice was weak, but the words were clear. As they lifted me onto the stretcher, I caught one last glimpse of the parade ground. Blood stained the concrete, stark against the shining boots of cadets still frozen at attention. The flag whipped in the hot wind, indifferent but resolute. The press lenses followed every movement. Somewhere in the chaos, I saw one reporter lower her camera, her hand trembling. She had tears in her eyes, and I realized then that the image of me saluting through blood would travel further than Carla's lies ever could. The ambulance doors slammed shut. Sirens wailed as Charleston blurred past the windows. I clutched weakly at the edge of the stretcher, whispering through the mask, "She didn't win." The medic leaned close, nodding firmly. "No, Lieutenant, not today." My eyelids grew heavy, but before I gave into the dark, I held on to one last thought. The city had seen, the nation would see, and no one would ever again mistake Carla Walker's control for love. When I woke, the first thing I noticed was the sterile white light. It wasn't the Charleston sun anymore, but fluorescent tubes humming above me. My chest throbbed, wrapped tight in bandages, every breath sharp and shallow. The room smelled of antiseptic, the soft beeping of monitors filling the silence. For a moment, I thought I was still on the parade ground, that the gun was still aimed at me, that the crowd was still screaming. But then, the blur cleared. A nurse leaned over me, her voice calm but firm. "You're at MUSC Health? You're safe." Safe. The word felt foreign on my tongue. My throat was dry, my lips cracked, but I whispered anyway. "Carla." The nurse's expression flickered. "In custody. Military police and Charleston PD have her." Relief surged, but so did fear. Carla had always found ways to twist reality to make neighbors believe her, to turn me into the villain. I closed my eyes, bracing for the spin I knew she would unleash. Hours passed in fragments of sleep and pain. I drifted between dreams of Goose Creek and the flash of steel, between the echo of gunfire and the steady rhythm of the monitor beside me. When I finally woke to voices, it was my mother's I heard first. She sat in a chair at my bedside, her shoulders slumped, eyes red-rimmed. She reached for my hand but hesitated before touching it, as if afraid she didn't have the right. "Lauren," she whispered, her voice breaking. I turned my head, the effort making my chest ache. "Mom!" Her face crumpled, tears spilling freely. "I should have protected you. All those years I should have stopped her." The weight of her words pressed heavier than the bandages. I wanted to be angry, but the exhaustion was too deep. I squeezed her hand weakly. "You can still tell the truth now." She nodded, a sharp, trembling nod, as if she had been waiting for permission. Later that afternoon, the door opened and General Whitaker entered. His presence filled the room even out of uniform. His eyes swept the machines, the bandages, and then fixed on me. "Lieutenant Bennett," he said, his voice steady. I tried to sit straighter, instinctive, but pain pulled me back. He stepped closer. "You showed courage today. You stood when you could have fallen. The Army saw it. The city saw it. And make no mistake, your stepmother will answer for it." His words steadied me more than the IV drip at my side. Outside those walls, Charleston buzzed. I didn't know it then, but the image of me saluting while blood soaked my uniform had already spread. The Post and Courier ran the headline, "By evening commissioning ceremony turns violent. Lieutenant salutes while wounded." National outlets picked it up within hours. Photos of me, pale but defiant, were everywhere. Strangers I had never met began to call me a symbol of resilience. But inside the hospital, I was just a woman trying to breathe without pain. Police reports confirmed Carla had smuggled the gun in her bag, bypassing security, by manipulating an old acquaintance on staff. She was charged with attempted murder, possession of a firearm on school property, and multiple counts of endangering the public. The words looked strong on paper, but I knew she would fight them. She always fought twisting blame like a blade. Rumors began almost immediately. Some neighbors from Goose Creek told reporters I had provoked Carla, that I had been disrespectful for years. Hearing those words on the evening news stung worse than the wound. Even lying in a hospital bed hooked to machines, I could feel her shadow pressing against me. But there was another current too louder this time. Veterans called in to radio shows, their voices rough with emotion, saying no parent should ever strike at a soldier in uniform. Letters poured into the hospital, some from strangers in Charleston, some from across the country, each one telling me to hold my head high. A retired Marine wrote Lieutenant Bennett your salute, shamed your attacker more than any sentence ever will. I clutched that letter to my chest when pain kept me awake at night. The next morning, reporters gathered outside MUSC, their cameras flashing as doctors gave brief statements. My name was on every headline, my face on every screen. And though the attention felt surreal, almost suffocating, one thought grounded me. Carla's lies could not drown this out. Not this time. For once, the truth had been captured in a single frame. A soldier saluting while bleeding, a city watching in shock, a stepmother revealed for what she was. That night, as monitors beeped steadily and the Charleston skyline glowed beyond the window, I whispered into the dark, "She doesn't own me anymore." The hospital walls became both my refuge and my prison. Outside, the story had already taken on a life of its own. Reporters huddled at the entrance of MUSC, their microphones waving like bayonets every time a nurse walked past. For a brief moment, I believed the photo of me saluting through blood had settled everything. I believed people would finally see Carla for what she was. But I underestimated her talent for twisting lies into weapons. 2 days after the shooting, local stations ran interviews with Goose Creek neighbors. They spoke with certainty, their words slicing deep. Carla did everything for that girl, one woman insisted, raised her like her own when the father died. Another chimed in, Lauren always thought she was better than everyone once she got into the Citadel. I watched from my hospital bed, my stomach churning. Carla's voice recorded from jail played over the broadcast. Smooth, manipulative, calculated. I only meant to protect myself, she claimed. Lauren came at me. She's unstable, always has been. The anchor's face remained carefully neutral, but the damage was done. For every letter of support I received, there was another headline questioning my character. On talk radio, callers debated whether I had staged the salute for attention. "You expect me to believe she just stood there bleeding?" One scoffed. "Sounds like a stunt." My hands shook so badly the IV rattled against its stand. My mother tried to turn off the television, but I snapped, "No. I need to hear what they're saying," because ignoring it wouldn't make it disappear. It was Goose Creek all over again, Carla spinning the narrative me silenced by doubt. I lay awake at night staring at the ceiling tiles, the beeping monitors counting the seconds of my humiliation. Rage simmered in me hotter than the pain of my wound. I had bled in front of a city I had saluted with everything I had left, and still people chose to believe her. The feeling of betrayal was suffocating. Nurses whispered about the press camped outside. My classmates from the Citadel visited, their eyes fierce, their voices steady as they told me I was not alone. But when they left, the silence was louder. One evening, the news replayed Carla's courtroom footage. She stood in shackles, but her voice dripped with sweetness as she addressed the judge. I loved her like my own. She turned violent. I was afraid. Tears streaked her cheeks as if she were the victim. The sight made bile rise in my throat. I hurled the remote across the bed, the plastic cracking against the wall. My mother flinched, whispering, "People will see the truth, Lauren." They will. But I could hear the doubt in her voice, too. The city was divided. Some called me a hero. Others called me a fraud. The weight of it pressed down until I could barely breathe. The breaking point came when I overheard two orderlies outside my door. One muttered, "You think she faked it for the cameras?" The other shrugged. Wouldn't be the first time someone used the uniform for attention. Their voices faded down the hall, but the words lingered like poison. I pressed my face into the pillow and screamed until my throat was raw, the sound muffled by cotton. That night, for the first time since the shooting, I felt the old fear return, the fear that Carla might still win, even behind bars. The morning the tide began to turn, I woke to find General Whitaker standing at the foot of my hospital bed. He was in full dress uniform, stars gleaming under the sterile lights, his cap tucked neatly under one arm. His presence filled the small room, silencing even the beeping machines. My mother sat straighter, her eyes wide. For a moment, I thought I was dreaming. "Lieutenant Bennett," he said firmly, "enough is enough. Your stepmother has poisoned the narrative for too long. We will not let her win this battle." His words carried the certainty of command, the kind that had moved soldiers across continents. I managed a whisper, my throat raw. They believe her, sir. They think I staged it. His jaw tightened and he leaned closer, his gaze unwavering. Do you trust me? I swallowed, then nodded. Yes, sir. He straightened his shoulders, squaring as if preparing for combat. Then let me fight this one beside you. That afternoon, the press gathered in front of MUSC Health. Cameras jostled microphones thrust forward, the buzz of anticipation vibrating through the crowd. The hospital doors opened and General Whitaker stepped out. The chatter stilled instantly. His voice rang out steady and unyielding. On Saturday, I stood less than 10 feet from Lieutenant Lauren Bennett when her stepmother drew a firearm and opened fire during her commissioning ceremony. I watched Lieutenant Bennett take a bullet to the chest, and I watched her stand bleeding to salute the flag of the United States. He paused, letting the words settle. Murmurs rippled through the reporters. Flashes popped as cameras captured the stern set of his face. This was not theater. This was not a stunt. This was courage in the face of violence. And I will not stand by while anyone tarnishes the honor of a soldier who bled for her oath on the very day she took it. The statement struck like a hammer. News outlets scrambled their headlines, rewriting in real time. Clips of his speech flooded social media. Veterans groups reposted his words, adding their own voices. We stand with Lieutenant Bennett. Calls poured into local stations' former service members vowing that anyone who had served knew the truth of that salute. Inside my hospital room, I watched it unfold on television, tears streaming silently down my face. For the first time since the shot rang out, I felt the weight lift, if only slightly. The city was no longer hearing just Carla's lies. They were hearing the voice of a 4-star general. The next day, national networks requested interviews. Whitaker sat across from anchors on primetime broadcasts, his words sharp as steel. I have commanded soldiers for 35 years, he told one interviewer. I know the look of courage. I saw it in Lauren Bennett as she stood bleeding. That image will not be stolen by falsehoods. The clip went viral. My inbox overflowed with messages of support. Strangers wrote from Texas, Ohio, even as far as Alaska. They called me brave. They called me unbroken. A Vietnam veteran wrote, "That salute reminded me of why we wore the uniform. Don't let them silence you." For every doubt, Carla had sown Whitaker's words, and the veterans' chorus burned it away. By the end of the week, the Post and Courier ran a new headline, General defends Lieutenant City rallies behind commissioning hero. The picture of Carla being dragged in handcuffs was placed side by side with my blood-stained salute. The contrast spoke louder than any testimony. Sitting in my hospital bed, watching the tide turn, I realized something important. Carla had spent years controlling the story in Goose Creek, twisting neighbors against me, making me doubt my own truth. But now the stage was larger, the audience wider, and the lies could not hold. Whitaker's voice had given mine strength, and together we had shifted the war. The media frenzy didn't stop, but its tone had changed. Reporters no longer asked if I had staged the salute. They asked what I would do next, what message I wanted to share. For the first time in years, the story wasn't hers. It was mine. The first day of trial dawned gray. Charleston wrapped in a damp fog that clung to the streets and seemed to seep into my bones. The courthouse stood tall on Broad Street, its stone steps slick from an early rain. Crowds gathered outside, cameras flashing as I stepped from the car. My uniform was pressed my posture straight, but every muscle in my body tensed as reporters shouted questions. Lieutenant Bennett, how does it feel facing your stepmother today? Do you think justice will finally come? I kept my chin up, repeating silently what Whitaker had told me. Own your truth. No one can take that from you. Inside, the air was heavy with anticipation. The polished oak benches were filled with spectators, neighbors from Goose Creek, cadets from the Citadel, strangers who had read the headlines and come to watch the drama play out. Their whispers buzzed like hornets. At the front, the judge adjusted his glasses, his gavel resting like a threat. And then Carla entered. Shackled, flanked by guards, but her chin high, her eyes scanning the room as if she still owned it. She wore a navy blazer, her hair perfectly styled. To anyone who didn't know her, she could have passed for a wronged woman ready to plead her case. When her gaze locked on me, she smirked. It was the same smirk she'd worn when she punctured my basketball, when she ripped my jersey, when she tore down my Citadel posters. It sent a chill down my spine. The opening statements began. The prosecutor painted the picture clearly: a stepmother who had manipulated, controlled, and finally attempted to murder her stepdaughter at her own commissioning ceremony. The words echoed through the chamber, strong and sharp. I gripped the edge of the bench, my chest tight with both validation and dread. Then came the defense. Carla's lawyer, a polished man in a gray suit with a drawl thick as molasses, spun a different tale. He described Carla as a devoted stepmother driven to desperation by an ungrateful, unstable child. He pointed toward me with practiced calm. "This young woman has a history of dramatics," he said. She staged her salute for attention. "My client feared for her life." The words stabbed like knives, and a murmur rippled through the courtroom. I wanted to leap up to shout the truth, but Whitaker's steady hand on my shoulder reminded me to wait. Evidence would speak louder than outrage. Still, as the gavel struck to dismiss for the day, the lines were drawn. Supporters clustered around me outside, holding signs that read, "Justice for Lauren," while others whispered doubts. The city was divided, and I knew the battle had only just begun. The second day of the trial opened with the defense eager to seize control. Carla sat at the table, back straight, hands folded neatly as if she were the picture of dignity. Her lawyer rose and called the first witness, a neighbor from Goose Creek. Mrs. Donnelly, a woman I remembered from church potlucks, walked stiffly to the stand. She glanced at me once, then quickly looked away. The defense asked, "How would you describe Lauren Bennett as a teenager?" Mrs. Donnelly cleared her throat. She was troubled, always distant. Carla tried to guide her, but Lauren pushed everyone away. My chest tightened. Memories flooded back, Carla whispering in neighbors' ears, planting seeds of doubt. Now those seeds were sprouting here, in front of a jury that hung on every word. The lawyer nodded solemnly. "And did Carla ever express fear for her safety?" "Yes," Mrs. Donnelly replied quickly. "She said Lauren had a temper, that she worried what might happen when Lauren went off to that military school." Murmurs rippled through the gallery. I clenched my fists under the table, the urge to shout almost unbearable. But the prosecutor whispered, "Hold steady. Their own lies will trip them." More witnesses followed. A former teacher claimed I was withdrawn and combative, describing times I skipped class to avoid humiliation at home, but twisting it into proof of instability. Another neighbor insisted Carla sacrificed everything to raise me, her voice quivering as if she were describing a saint. Each word landed heavy. My heart pounded, sweat pricking under my collar. It was Goose Creek all over again. Voices I had grown up hearing, siding with Carla, reshaping my life into a story where she was savior and I was villain. I could feel the jury's eyes on me, weighing every accusation. Doubt crept like smoke. What if they believed it? What if after everything, the salute, the blood, the chaos, they still chose her version? When the defense rested for the day, Carla's lawyer flashed a satisfied smile as though the case were already won. Carla leaned back in her chair, the corner of her mouth twitching in triumph. The gavel struck. Court adjourned. I sat, frozen fury burning in my veins. Outside, the press swarmed. Some shouted questions about the witnesses, about Carla's good reputation. I pushed past them, my jaw set, but inside I was cracking. That night in the hospital, I stared at the ceiling, replaying every lie. For years, Carla had built this arsenal brick by brick, and now she was firing it in full view of the world. But as the darkness pressed in, Whitaker's words returned steady and immovable. "Truth always holds, Lieutenant. Lies always split at the seams." I clung to that hope because deep down I knew the tide was coming. The truth had powerful witnesses too. And when their turn came, the mask Carla wore would finally begin to crack. On the third day, the courtroom was packed tighter than ever. The gallery buzzed with anticipation, the air charged like a storm about to break. Carla sat at the defense table, her hands folded neatly, her face the mask of a victim. I had learned that expression well. It was the same one she used in Goose Creek to convince neighbors she was the savior of our family. But today, her performance was about to meet its match. The prosecutor rose. "The state calls General Robert Whitaker." A ripple moved through the room. When he entered, the atmosphere shifted instantly. He wore his full dress uniform, the 4 silver stars on his shoulders glinting under the lights. His stride was steady, deliberate, each step echoing authority. Even the judge seemed to sit a little straighter. Whitaker took the oath and sat, his gaze sweeping across the courtroom before settling on the jury. He did not look at Carla. He did not need to. The prosecutor's voice was calm. "General Whitaker, can you describe what you witnessed on the morning of May 15th at the Citadel?" His voice was steady, deep. I was seated in the front row, 3 chairs from Lieutenant Bennett. I watched her stepmother rise, draw a firearm from her handbag, and fire directly at her. Gasps rippled through the gallery. The prosecutor leaned closer. "And what did Lieutenant Bennett do after she was struck?" A flicker of something pride-steel passed over his face. She stood. She raised her hand. She saluted the flag while blood spread across her uniform. His words hit the room like a drumbeat. The jury's eyes widened, their pens pausing mid-note. The prosecutor continued, "General, in your decades of service, what did that act mean to you?" Whitaker's jaw tightened, his voice firm. "I have commanded soldiers in combat across the globe. I have watched men and women stand under fire." That salute was no performance. It was the act of a soldier who chose honor over collapse duty, over fear. Anyone who suggests otherwise does not understand courage. His words echoed in the chamber, a reverberation of truth. Carla's lawyer shifted in his chair, his practiced calm cracking. He rose for cross-examination, his drawl deliberate. "General, isn't it possible that Lieutenant Bennett exaggerated her actions, that in the chaos of the moment what you perceived as a salute was simply no?" Whitaker's voice cut like a blade. The lawyer faltered. Whitaker leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "I know what I saw." Lieutenant Bennett stood bleeding, and she saluted her country. "That is fact, not theater. Fact." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Even the judge paused before clearing his throat. When Whitaker stepped down, the gallery erupted into murmurs, some even breaking into applause before the gavel slammed for order. I sat frozen, my throat, thick tears burning behind my eyes. For years, Carla had controlled the narrative, turning neighbors against me, spinning lies into truths. But in that moment, with the weight of a 4-star general's testimony hanging in the air, the walls of her illusion began to crack. For the first time in the trial, she avoided my gaze. The 4th day of trial began with a tension that hummed through the courtroom like electricity. The prosecutor's voice carried clearly. "The state calls Margaret Bennett." My heart clenched as my mother rose slowly from her seat in the gallery. For years, she had been a shadow in Carla's story, silent, trembling, too afraid to step into the light. Now she walked down the aisle, her hands shaking, her eyes darting as if Carla might leap from her chair at any second. When she took the oath, her voice wavered, but she did not falter. She sat down, and for the first time since this ordeal began, she raised her chin. The prosecutor approached gently. "Mrs. Bennett, can you describe your relationship with Carla Walker?" My mother's eyes flicked to Carla, then to me. She swallowed hard. "At first, I thought she saved me. After my husband Michael died, I was lost. Carla was kind, attentive. She made me feel like I wasn't alone." Her voice broke, and she pressed a tissue to her lips. But it changed. Slowly at first. She took over everything, our finances, our friends, our home. And when Lauren grew, she stopped, tears welling. She turned cruel. The prosecutor's tone was steady. "Cruel? How, Mrs. Bennett?" My mother's hands trembled in her lap. She tore up Lauren's report cards if they weren't perfect. She ripped her basketball jersey. She broke things just to watch her cry. And when Lauren tried to stand up for herself, Carla hit her. A sharp gasp filled the courtroom. My chest tightened, the truth ringing in my ears after years of silence. My mother dabbed her eyes, her voice gaining strength with each word. "I should have stopped it. I was afraid. She threatened me, too. She said without her, I'd have nothing. And I believed her. But I watched my daughter suffer because of my weakness." She turned to the jury, her face wet with tears, but steady. "Carla Walker has always been violent. What she did at the Citadel was not sudden. It was the end of years of cruelty." Carla shot up in her chair, her composure finally cracking. "She's lying!" she shouted, her voice shrill. The gavel slammed. "Order!" the judge barked. The jury leaned forward, eyes wide, as the bailiff forced Carla back into her seat. The prosecutor gave a final question. "Mrs. Bennett, why speak now?" My mother looked at me, her voice breaking but clear. "Because I owe my daughter the truth, because silence only protects the abuser, and because if I don't speak now, I'll lose her forever." The words landed like thunder. The courtroom was silent but for the sound of her tears. I gripped the edge of the table, my throat thick with emotion. For the first time in my life, my mother had chosen me over Carla, and in that moment, I knew the jury had seen the truth. The final day of the trial arrived with a heavy stillness. The gallery was full, every bench occupied, the air thick with expectation. I sat at the plaintiff's table, my uniform pressed, my hands folded tightly in my lap. My chest still ached from the wound, but the deeper ache was anticipation waiting for the gavel to strike, waiting to hear if justice would finally breathe. The jury filed in, faces solemn, eyes avoiding Carla's glare. The foreman rose, a sheet of paper trembling slightly in his hand. My heart pounded so loudly I thought it might drown out his words. The judge's voice was crisp. "Has the jury reached a verdict? We have your honor." The room stilled, breaths held. "On the charge of attempted murder, we find the defendant Carla Walker guilty." The word seemed to echo off the oak-paneled walls, sharp and final. Gasps erupted. My breath caught my hands flying to my mouth. For a second, the world spun and then tears filled my eyes. The foreman continued, "On the charge of possession of a firearm on school property, guilty. On the charge of reckless endangerment, guilty." Carla shot to her feet, her face twisted with rage. "This is a lie!" she screamed, her voice shrill. "She set me up. She's ungrateful. I gave her everything." The judge slammed the gavel. "Order! Sit down, Ms. Walker." But she fought against the bailiffs, her blazer slipping off one shoulder, hair tumbling as she writhed against their grip. "She ruined me. She's nothing without me." Her words were raw, desperate, stripped of the careful mask she had worn for years. The jury flinched at her outburst. The truth of her nature spilled out for all to see. The judge's voice thundered over the chaos. "Carla Walker, you are hereby sentenced to 25 years in the South Carolina Department of Corrections." The gavel fell again, final and unyielding. Carla's scream echoed as she was dragged from the room, shackles clinking, her voice fading into the corridor. The silence left behind was thick, broken only by the sound of my mother's sobs. She reached for me, her hands trembling, whispering through tears. "It's over, Lauren. It's finally over." I rose slowly, my legs shaking, the weight of years pressing down and then lifting in a rush. When I stepped into the sunlight outside Charleston County Courthouse, the crowd erupted. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, but what I saw were faces, strangers holding signs that read, "Courage and Justice for Lauren." Among them stood cadets from the Citadel saluting in silent solidarity, and beside me, steady as ever, was General Whitaker. He placed a hand on my shoulder, his voice low but resolute. "Today, Lieutenant Bennett, you won more than a case. You reclaimed your name." I lifted my chin, the Carolina sky wide and blue above me. For the first time in years, I breathed freely. The shadow of Carla Walker was gone, and in its place stood a future of my own making. The roar of the crowd outside Charleston County Courthouse still rang in my ears as the bailiffs led Carla away. The trial had lasted weeks, each day a battle of words and credibility. But in the end, the truth had clawed its way to the surface. For the first time in years, I wasn't the frightened stepdaughter hiding in shadows. I was Lieutenant Lauren Bennett, standing tall in the Carolina sun. The press surged forward as I exited. Microphones thrust toward me, cameras clicking furiously. "Lieutenant Bennett, how do you feel?" one reporter shouted. Another asked, "Do you believe justice was truly served?" My lips trembled, but I held my chin high. I believed the truth finally spoke louder than the lies I said. My voice steadier than I felt. The words were picked up, repeated, and by that evening they were printed across headlines. "Lieutenant Bennett, the truth finally spoke louder than the lies." I didn't linger on the courthouse steps. General Whitaker ushered me past the press, his hand firm at my back, shielding me as if I were one of his own soldiers. "Let them talk," he murmured. "Your story will outlive the noise." That night, the local news led with the verdict. Commentators debated Carla's fall from grace. Neighbors who once defended her now avoided the cameras, and letters began to arrive at the hospital where I was recovering. Some were from strangers across South Carolina, others from veterans' families in distant states. They all said the same thing. "You gave us hope. You reminded us not to stay silent." The weeks that followed were a blur of physical therapy and interviews. My shoulder healed slowly, the scar tugging each time I raised my arm. At first, every twinge of pain dragged me back to that moment at the ceremony, the flash, the sound, the sharp burn of betrayal. Nights were worse. I'd wake with Carla's scream in my ears, drenched in sweat, heart hammering. But in the quiet hours of the hospital, when fear clawed at me, Robert Whitaker appeared like clockwork. Sometimes he came in full uniform ribbons and stars gleaming. Other times he arrived in a simple blazer carrying nothing but his notepad. He never rushed me. He never pressed. He simply sat in the chair by my bed, steady and unshakable, his presence reminding me that storms could be weathered. One evening, when I admitted I wasn't sure how to go on, he leaned forward and signed slowly. "Strength is not the absence of scars. It is carrying them with honor." I repeated those words to myself every morning. By midsummer, Charleston was buzzing. The Post and Courier ran editorials praising my courage. National outlets picked up the story, running the now iconic photograph me in a blood-soaked uniform, arm raised in salute as chaos erupted behind me. That image spread far beyond South Carolina. It appeared in veteran halls, women's advocacy centers, and even church bulletins. Strangers stopped me in grocery stores to whisper, "Thank you for standing tall." But beneath the praise, I wrestled with doubt. Was I a hero or simply a girl who had barely survived? The Citadel answered that question for me. In late August, after weeks of recovery, I walked across the campus once more. The sun blazed down on the parade ground just as it had on the day of my commissioning. My stepmother's shadow had darkened that day, but now the grounds felt different. The air was lighter, the flag snapping above me brighter. Cadets paused as I passed. Some saluted, others offered quiet nods of respect. These were men and women who knew what hardship looked like, and in their eyes I saw recognition. My wounds hadn't made me weak. They had carved resilience into my spine. My symbolic return came during morning drill. The cadence echoed off the stone walls, boots pounding in unison. As the formation ended, the commandant of cadets stepped forward. "Lieutenant Bennett," he said, his voice carrying across the field. "You have shown this institution and this city what it means to embody the Citadel's values of honor, duty, and respect." He gestured toward the ranks. "You are not just one of us. You are an example for us all." Applause rippled through the cadets, sharp and respectful. My throat tightened as I lifted my hand in salute, the scar on my shoulder pulling but not breaking me. In that moment, I no longer felt defined by pain or betrayal. I felt defined by choice, the choice to keep standing when it would have been easier to fall. Privately, my mother came to see me weeks after the sentencing. She looked smaller than I remembered, her face lined with exhaustion, her voice soft. "I don't know how to live without her," she admitted, twisting her hands. For so long she told me what to think, what to feel. I was afraid if I stepped out of line, I'd lose everything. I reached across the table, my hand covering hers. "Mom, you don't have to live in her shadow anymore. You can choose your own path." Tears welled in her eyes. She didn't answer, but she squeezed my hand, and for the first time I felt the possibility of change in her. As autumn settled over Charleston, I ran again along the Battery. The sea wind whipped across my face, gulls circling above the city, stretching wide with history and scars. Each footfall on the worn stone paths was a reminder I had survived the worst my family could do to me, and I had not broken. My scars would always tell the story, but they would not be the end of it. The ceremony that had begun in blood now lived on in defiance, in the image of a salute that refused to bow. For those who had watched my story unfold, neighbors, veterans, parents, and strangers scrolling late at night, I carried a simple message. Silence had chained me for years, protecting only the one who hurt me. But the moment I chose to stand trembling but unbroken, the chain snapped. That was the gift of justice, not erasing the scars, but turning them into proof that survival was possible. When I look back now, the moment that defined me wasn't only the guilty verdict or even the day the cameras flashed as I walked out of the courthouse. It wasn't General Whitaker's hand on my shoulder or the applause at the Citadel. The moment that defined me was smaller, quieter, the instant I chose not to be silent anymore. A girl in a white uniform, bleeding and afraid, stood up straight and saluted while the world collapsed around her. That choice carried me further than fear ever could. For years, my life had been shaped by control. Carla dictated my clothes, my friends, even my dreams. She thrived in silence, feeding on the fear she planted in others. But silence protects the abuser, never the abused. When I broke it, when I told the truth, even with my voice trembling, everything changed. People I had never met before stepped forward. Soldiers, mothers, survivors, each saying, "Your voice gave me courage." And that's when I realized survival is not just personal, it's communal. Every time one of us speaks, we tear a hole in the wall of silence, holding someone else captive. To those watching who are older, maybe 50, 60, even 70 years old, you know what it means to carry scars. You've seen the way families can wound deeper than strangers. You've witnessed neighbors look away rather than step in. And maybe you've carried your own silence believing it was too late to speak. Let me tell you, it is never too late. Dignity does not belong to the young or the strong alone. It belongs to anyone willing to stand to say enough. My life has changed in ways I never expected. I still wear the uniform, and every time I salute, I feel the pull of that scar on my shoulder. It's a reminder of what I endured, but also of what I overcame. My stepmother thought that pulling a trigger would keep me down forever. Instead, it etched into me a resilience no one can erase. My mother has begun her own journey, fragile but real, stepping out from Carla's shadow. And I, once a girl who believed her voice didn't matter now, stand before groups of veterans, cadets, and survivors, telling them the same truth that saved me. Silence is the enemy of justice. I won't pretend the journey is easy. Nights still come with echoes of shouting and the smell of gunpowder. But healing is not about erasing the past. It's about building something stronger on top of it. The Army gave me structure. The Citadel gave me discipline, but the choice to speak, that came from within. And if I could find it in the middle of blood and chaos, then anyone can find it in their own moment of fear. If you've carried your own story locked away, I urge you share it. Speak it. Write it down. Tell a neighbor, a pastor, a friend. Because when you speak, you light a torch that someone else in the dark may follow. That's the legacy I want to leave behind, not just my own survival, but a path for others. The image of me saluting while bleeding is out there forever printed, shared, and remembered. But more important than the photograph is the message it carries. We are not defined by the worst that has been done to us. We are defined by the choice to stand, to keep moving forward, to believe that dignity is worth fighting for. So I leave you with this. Look around your own life. Is there someone being silenced, overlooked, dismissed? Will you look away, or will you choose to see them? Because the smallest act of recognition can change everything. It can save a life. And if my story has moved you, if it made you angry, if it made you remember, if it made you whisper, "That could have been me," don't let it stop here. Share your thoughts in the comments. Someone scrolling tonight might need to read your words more than you realize. And before you go, click that subscribe button. Not for me, but for the community we are building here, one where no one has to feel invisible again.